Hello, my name's Jackie Kay and I'm Chancellor of the University of Salford and also the Scottish Macker, or the National Poet of Scotland. For years I've been coming to Manchester Literature Festival and I really admire the whole festival. I admire its ethos, I admire the way that you support activists and political thinkers as well as writers known and less well known. I admire the way that you support writers in translation. I admire your Manchester sermon. I think the events have a great buzz and energy to them, and I've been at so many over the years. I've loved doing events myself, often with my dear friend Ali Smith. They've been fantastic events. I've also loved attending events like the Manchester Sermon, which have given me food for thought for a very, very long time. But it's upsetting to me that you're in danger now, and I would really love anybody who supports you and literature, new writing and writers around the world to dig a wee bit into your pocket and pay the price of a drink or the price of a theatre ticket or anything that you could actually afford, and go on the website www.manchesterliteraturefestival.co.uk. Cheers.
Hello, I'm Kate Feld, and I am delighted to be here talking with Tori Amos for this special Manchester Literature Festival event. Tori is, of course, the Grammy-nominated singer, songwriter, pianist, and composer who has released 15 studio albums, beginning with her career-defining debut solo album, Little Earthquakes, in 1992. Tori, I first encountered your music as a college student in the United States in the early 90s, when a friend put the song Silent All These Years on a mixtape she gave to me. It just didn't sound like anything else I was hearing at that time. It completely knocked me out. And it wasn't just the different sound that made such an impression on me. It was the subject matter and the words. I think your songs often address very serious issues confronting things like sexual assault, the patriarchy, the fallout from 9/11, and war and injustice of all kinds. And it's been great learning the stories behind these songs in your new book. I'm going to hold it up here, Resistance, a Songwriter's Story of Hope, Change, and Courage, which weaves stories from your own life and your music career with reflections on creative practice, feminism, activism, and the transformative power of the artist. Welcome, Tori.
Oh, Kate, thank you for having me. And it's always nice to talk about the 90s, the early 90s. Writing Little Earthquakes was life-changing for me because I had a record before that. And I talk about that in this book too. And it was a failure. And so I had to then write myself really out of a certain type of hell. And I had to experience failure, I guess, in order to find the type of writer that I was. And I try and encourage other songwriters. You might not know the type of writer you are by the time you're 16 or 18. Some people do. There are those people. But not all of us find our writer's soul. So I just want to encourage people. Sometimes it takes some time to find that, and you have to write some stinkers until you find that.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about this so in such an interesting way in this book, because I think what I enjoyed so much about it was, as someone who loves your music, was just reading the backstory about how you really found your voice as an artist, how you found your style. And yeah, when you talk about in the beginning, you really had to fight for what you, not just fight and work to develop your style, but really stick up for your songs when it came to how they were going to sound and how, the record company wanted them to sound. And I found that really inspiring because, at that point you were still quite early in your career, and that must have been very difficult to to listen to your own voice there?
The greatest thing that ever happened to me was the failure of Why Can't Tori Read in 1988, which was the first album that I did with Atlantic Records. And I'll tell you, failure can really be a great friend, because you begin to see how people respond to you when you're going through something so cataclysmic as a creative failure, or what is perceived to be a failure. And so I guess you could say, especially in LA at that time, people treated me as if they were allergic to me because they didn't want to catch failure. So I guess some people that I thought were my colleagues and good acquaintances really, really weren't the people that I knew I wanted to have in my life. And I began to see that the music business, I saw it for what it was. And yes, there are some true blue people in that field, as there are true blue people in every field. But there are also people that really aren't there for the challenges and the challenging projects, and the projects that take some gumption and take some drive to push through. And let's be honest, sometimes you have to be a bit of a badass. You have to say, no, you're not taking those pianos off those songs. I'll give you different songs. And we talk about that story in the book in depth, having to work through that process when Little Earthquakes was rejected. Mm-hmm. It's true, Silent All These Years was rejected, as you hear it. And Crucify and other songs like that, not Precious Things, that hadn't been written yet. So, but a lot of the songs on that record, Winter, were. And they wanted to take all the pianos, mute them, and then insert the guitars, which we talk about, that traumatizing confrontation in the book. And it was the Muses who really took me to a place of, they want a different tone.
Yeah.
And you can give that to them while you're protecting the other songs. And so that was really a challenging moment, but hopefully we cover it in the book.
You do. I found it absolutely fascinating the way you talk about the Muses. And I found that one of the things, as a creative person myself, it was just so wonderful to read someone opening up their creative process in that way, because sadly, it's not something that we get to see a lot of the time when we're talking to artists and creatives that we admire. It's a very generous thing to open that up to your readers in the way that you have, and I think that because I'm sure everyone has a completely different thing going on, but for you, the way that you have the Muses and the kinds of conversations you have with them, and the role that they play in, you making your work, I think is fascinating. Now, how did this start? That was a very long time ago when you're talking about Little Earthquakes. Had the Muses, when did you kind of develop this relationship with the Muses?
I have known them ever since I can remember anything. And I guess for a while, I was very, very close to them at a very young age. And perhaps that's because children have, they're not unlearning magic. They haven't set about to do that yet. They haven't started saying, you can't talk to these creatures. You don't do that when you're 2 and 3, 4, 5. Even I'd say until maybe you're an adolescent. So that was really a magical thing that I didn't question. It's when I started chasing the commercial side of being a songwriter, and I had to learn that that wasn't my path. My path wasn't to try and write songs like the ones on the radio and then do a variation on that theme. And then that would be who I was as a songwriter. That just didn't work. I didn't write the songs that resonated with people when I did that. So the Muses kind of pulled away. I'd say for several years. for quite a while. And I think that's because, Kate, when I was chasing this idea of success that I had, that wasn't their idea of success for our collaboration. It
Wow.
needed to be more authentic and based on you write because you're documenting what you're seeing and how you're experiencing it. But if you're trying to chase someone else's experience that doesn't resonate with you because you think that will be successful, then we're done with you, Tori.
Wow.
We're going to go see somebody else. And so I had to painfully walk that road for several years of, I've been playing professionally in bars since I was 13, and the book goes into that whole thing. And I learned a lot playing other people's songs. You learn a lot. You learn about their structures, and you learn how they solve music problems within their structure. So that was a huge expansion for me as a musician and songwriter, playing 6 nights a week, doing happy hour, then singing and playing for the late night shift, and learning those songs by great songwriters. But then for some reason, I decided I was going to chase the top 40 songwriting thing. And that just wasn't where I found, as I said, my true north as a writer. So I had to experience that. And the Muses had to kind of let me write songs. I call it, they're in my music graveyard for several years.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all just very, very grateful that you did listen to the Muses, eventually, and you got there. I mean,
kicking and screaming,
yeah,
and failure, and it was, they can be quite ruthless, and that's fine. I respect that. And when I say that, it's not as if they just show up every day. It doesn't work like that. And I'm sure in your work, you as a writer, you have to really chop wood and carry water, as they say creatively, in order then for this energy to come through and say, okay, let's now sprinkle some magic in here. Maybe this 2-bar phrase is working and this 2-bar phrase, and you find fragments in many different songs. For me, a whole song might not be working.
Yeah.
But when I'm collaborating, when I feel their energy, it's an energy force. And it doesn't come every day. It doesn't just show up and give it to me. I have to write and research every day. And then the inspiration somehow comes together. And I'm sure you have that experience as a writer yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think I do. So, and I think that, I totally agree with what you're saying about hard work. But that kind of what you're saying now reminded me of a wonderful passage in the book that I loved, where you say, being a songwriter is not always pretty. It can be scary because we're unearthing emotions that confront us with those portions of ourselves that we hide when we're posting on social media. The tension for me is holding the energy of service to serve the song at all costs with a healthy dose of fuck off, as you so beautifully put it. And that's a different kind of labor we're talking about now, which is also very important, serving the song, and holding back perhaps parts of yourself or parts of your persona that might be getting in the way of letting that song come through the way it needs to.
Yeah, you're right. You're very right, because sometimes the songs want to talk about things, a story that might put the protagonist, the person singing it, me, in a light that, well, I don't agree. I wouldn't want to do this in a song to another person that I care about. But the songs over the years, whether it's Cornflake Girl or whether it's The Waitress, whether it's You're Saying I Believe in Peace, Bitch, or whether it's confronting somebody in a song, sometimes I have to get out of the way.
Yeah.
And it's really like get you and your personal life for this time frame out of the way, T, because we're working on a narrative and a story, and you need to serve that. And you can't just hijack it. Yes, my own experiences may funnel into that, but if they're not aligning with what the song is talking about, then I have to say, no, I need to kind of keep my personal self and the scribe clear, and be that clear channel for what the song wants to be. And so that's been a bit of tug and pull over the years, and it's a learning curve. I'm always learning. I'm having to learn how to do that all the time, even now as I'm beginning to write more songs in the kind of crazy time that we're in, and trying to document this time that I've never experienced. Most of us have never experienced before anything like this. I think people that have lived through World War II, they have talked about. My husband has an aunt that is still alive that lived through that, and she has experiences and did of World War II, which kind of remind me of not knowing when this nightmare is going to end. So how are we all dealing with it, and how is it affecting us, and what are the songs that want to step forward in this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you, one of the things I loved about Resistance is, of course, you have the song lyrics in there, and then you're kind of, well, sometimes you're before the song lyrics, you're kind of, introducing the kind of backstory there. But a lot of the times you have the song lyrics, and then you have this sort of unpacking of what was going on and what was emerging in that song. A lot of history is in here. I mean, at the very beginning, when you're talking about playing in the piano bars in Washington, D.C., I think you have the hostage crisis in there. I mean, that's the first news event I can remember in my life, back in the days of Jimmy Carter, with the hostages and everything. And, right through to September 11th, and, things happening and going to Russia and Turkey. And now, as you've mentioned, we have the pandemic. And, because your work is so reactive, in a great way to, you're really picking up on what's happening in the world and putting that out in your music. I'm fascinated to see what you're picking up right now, and what kind of music is going to come out of this time for you.
Well, I think writing songs that reflect where people are, what's coming up for them emotionally because of the pandemic, is those songs are coming. It's as Americans, it's very difficult for me to really say that my pencil is sharpened until we get past November 3rd, November 4th, because we will be in a different type of world depending on which way the American people go.
Yeah.
And then depending on how people behave after and through the election, and what kind of theater we will be seeing, or nightmares we will be seeing. We just have to wait and see. And as writers, those of us that want to answer that, write toward that, I think there's a responsibility there, and there's an opportunity to write there. I always loved songwriters that were documenting their time through their eyes, whether it was Bob Dylan, the Beatles, Sam Cooke. There were songs that became so important to me as a little girl. When I was at the conservatory in 1968, I was accepted at 5 at the Peabody, and I saw how music was affecting the teenagers at the time, and it was really powering the conversations that needed to be had at that time, civil rights, the Vietnam War. And so I do think we're at a time right now, we're voting for a system of government, which is how I see it, and what the book talks about, really. I am referring back to the book Resistance that I've written. And it does talk about that maybe not in this detail, what I'm about to say, but we're voting for a system of government, which is either a type of democracy or an authoritarian regime. And we're seeing that we're having to shockingly see it in front of our eyes. And German journalists and writers have been talking about it with me for the last 3 months. Why can't we see there's a blueprint in the 20th century for oligarchs and for authoritarians and for tyrannical forces? And the title Resistance is really about resisting tyranny and resisting despondency as creators.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that parts of this book are a wonderful kind of primer on, how to take up that responsibility as an artist, and as a person who is, maybe not just an artist, but a creative person, or someone who feels the call to join this resistance, however they can. And I think that there is a lot of power in what you're writing here, and there's a lot of hope in it as well. And the hope is certainly what I myself am clinging to right now, as I think many other people are, because it's been a pretty dark time for America, as many other parts of the world. We've just never seen anything like this with the Black Lives Matter protests and the killing of George Floyd, and everything. It just feels like the country, the nationalism, it's just in flames right now, and yeah, I think that I'm interested to hear more people like you talking about the hope that can come, from our response to this.
Yes, there is hope, but we also have to understand something about America, and there's a book, Democracy in Chains. There's Dark Money by Jane Mayer, who talk about different things that have happened. Democracy in Chains goes through the last 300 years. Dark Money talks about the last 50, and how big money and politics are controlling a lot of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have to understand that there is a way of thinking, unfortunately, terribly, brutally, of the master and servant concept, that there are the oligarchs, those that have, and very, 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 very few, and then the serfs.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't wanted to really accept that this could be happening in the United States of America. But it has been happening with certain ways of thinking, and it's been sinister and hidden. And now we're beginning to see that there are really people who believe that there are a few that should be here, and the masses should be here serving them. Mm-hmm. And they call it liberty, as in extreme libertarians. But it isn't liberty for the masses. It isn't. So that's something that is really at stake right now at this election.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't always want to look at what's at stake, because we don't. This is a scary time. Yeah. And that's why writers, though, writers have reached out to me and said, but T, I'm not called to write politically. I haven't been in Washington, and I haven't been called to do that. Well, there's so many ways to reflect this time.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are writing beauty and healing, that type of music or those types of stories, and personal struggles with loss and grieving, things like that, or finding the joy in their day.
Mm. I mean, every kind of creating can contribute to, giving people something right now.
Yes.
And allowing people to share. I mean, I think that one of the themes I saw sort of in resistance in your book was this idea of songs, or, even, I mean, more widely, any kind of art, creating conversations and creating discourse. You have this wonderful way of talking about these song beings, which they visit you, you're with them for a while, and then they go off into the world, and all other kinds of things happen to them, and they have, they have other encounters with other people, and your songs have other meanings for other people, and you kind of let go of that. But I think that part of what these songs are doing is creating conversations for people. And I think that is a really important part of resistance, is getting people talking, and, getting people to look at, as you're saying, to look at the things that perhaps we don't want to look at, and talk about the things we don't want to talk about.
Well, that's how we outcreate destruction. That's how we actually resist tyranny. And the Russian people were talking with me about that when I was touring there in 2014.
Mm.
And that was the time where Ukraine had been invaded by Russia. And so the Russian people, though, were talking to me about how they coped with technological warfare and propaganda, being told lies constantly, every minute of the day. And how they combat it, some of them anyway, is literally through art. A poem, a novel, a story, visual art, dance, music. They weave this kind of artistic armor around themselves, and they pull on that for their truth and for their strength. And it really kind of made me see, wow, to have an artistic armor that allows creativity to come in. It can seep in, but it doesn't allow hatred to come in. And the key word for me was despondency, because what they said, the most dangerous place you can get to is when you give up.
Yeah.
That, as for not just artists, but as people, if we give up, then that's it. Then that's it for the future generations, for our climate, for equality. That's it.
Yeah.
So that's the key. Resistance isn't about resisting expansion. And that word, the word resistance, the one reason I used it is because I was watching it become a pejorative.
Wow.
And as in, you're resisting who you could be. You're resisting the opportunity that this pandemic can be giving. And you keep going, okay, stop with the new age crap. And we have to really, really look at how do we resist tyranny and those who want to subjugate and enslave minds, hearts and minds, through technological warfare and propaganda.
Yeah. I mean, I love how this book does not, beat around the bush about, we are in a crisis right now, and we all have to step up here. I mean, it doesn't get more serious than this. Certainly in America this week, we've got Mitch McConnell trying to plow another Supreme Court justice through, and you write so powerfully about Dr. Christine Blasey Ford and her brave testimony during the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. And that kind of goes back to Anita Hill, and, who's also mentioned in your book in the context of your songs. I mean, and it's hard not to feel despondent sometimes when we see the same thing happening again and again, particularly for women, all over the world. But I think the thing I really took from your writing here was, even though, Dr. Ford's testimony didn't perhaps get the result that it should have gotten, it created a kind of real tipping point, a moment that actually did affect incredible change, because a whole generation of women, immediately that was it. They lost trust in the government, and I think that that really put a different perspective on it for me. What you wrote.
RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, the national hotline, assault hotline in America, received more calls. It's been there since 1994, and it received more calls at that time during Dr. Ford's hearing, and during, at the time, Judge Kavanaugh's hearing. And what I took away from that was that people would not disappear. They would not allow their story to disappear, and they wouldn't allow whatever was going on in Washington with the quid pro quo, as they call it, and we talk about that in the book, and what that really means. These people calling were awakened, and they wouldn't be silenced. And I found that so strong of a message at that time. I chose to write about that and take away from that time that people were talking about their experience and refused to be, again, ignored.
Yeah.
And they didn't need someone else's approval from what I was told by those who work at the hotline. They needed to share what happened for themselves, to be able to acknowledge it for themselves. And then, of course, we know people got active in government. How exciting. We had more women that were in the House of Representatives. And I find that this is what we have to hold on to, is that we do have a power and that we have a responsibility to use it. But how you use yours and your gifts and how someone else uses theirs might be so different. And it might not be confronting Washington. Not everybody is called to do that. Mm-hmm. And I'm not called to do that all the time. As you know, I've written hundreds of songs that don't have to do with that. But sometimes there are some that do. And I did, cut my teeth there playing piano bar for many years. And I'm a minister's daughter, and my father was there in the inner loop of the Beltway as a Methodist minister. So I have those experiences, but we all have different experiences that are needed right now. Every experience, I believe. And some people, I've heard from some artists that they saying, you know what, I have to write towards beauty. I have to write towards healing. And we need that as much as anything right now.
Yeah. And there's no wrong answer, really. You know what I mean? I guess the trick is knowing what you're drawn to and what, you're kind of called to do, and just following that, which is, harder to do sometimes than it seems. But I think that, we're lucky that that's what happened with you. I wanted to ask you about your fans. Now, your fans are, impressively devoted to you. I think you have the most incredible fans who, your work is such a huge, huge part of their lives. And of course, your fans are living all over the world. You've talked so much in the book about when you perform live and, how you are talking with people. People are getting letters and messages to you. And it seems to be this incredible process of, taking in energy and taking in messages from people and communications and talking to people. And then when you perform, you're kind of soaking up the mood of the room, and you put together these set lists that really encapsulate what is going on, whether it's in Turkey or it's in Russia, the night before Putin is going to go on the same stage with his kind of thugs, making, ransacking the place. I mean, it's really interesting because I don't think I've read of another performing artist who has quite the same thing going on, in terms of creating a focal point for the mood of the room. I wondered if you could talk about, how that started to happen and and really what it's like now, perhaps, that you're not performing.
I started doing meet and greets after the show in 1992. And people would leave me with letters because it became too much to talk about it in line.
Mm-hmm.
And with the written letters, I would begin to understand what other people were experiencing. And this has been going on since 1992, whereby people from all ages come and usually drop by a written letter, and I read them. I read them all, and some of the crew will say, "Incinerate them! They're taking up too much room on the bus." I'm like, oh, we have to read them. And it's a collaboration. You'd be amazed what I learn, what people think about, and their relationship with certain songs. That I had no idea that a song might move somebody in this way or make them think in this way. And you think, wow, I never considered that. So it's very collaborative in that way. And also, I must say, in a way, they're a bit MI6 because they come and bring information. And this is globally.
Yeah.
So as I'm touring, always at the stage door, there'll be people there that pass me on some information, say so-and-so couldn't be here, they'll be at the show, but they've had this request and they wanted you to know this information.
Wow.
And sometimes, I mean, it's not, national security breaking necessarily, but sometimes it's really just insightful.
Wow.
And you think, wow, so the relationship, I don't really see people that come to the show as fans. I see them as collaborators.
Okay.
And that when we do a live show, a lot of their requests contribute to the narrative that night. And they're telling me usually, did you know that this happened in Chicago in the last week? Did you know that this is going on? So when I'm playing Chicago, I'm able to really ground and in that city, make it a reflection of what's going on. And this is how each show is hopefully documenting that time frame in that place. And they help me to do that.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible. And you can really see those skills that you developed, as playing those piano bars as a teenager and a young woman. Your skill, you talk about reading a room and finding the specific tonal center of, a gathering of people. And it's incredible to see how you have expanded that out to include, a city, and, talking about what's happening in the city or, what's happening in the country, and creating a kind of collective event that can happen, in that night.
A technique that I think is important that we share with other collaborators and writers and creators is that when I take stage, I'm not mom or wife or T, the friend, or auntie or sister.
Yeah.
I'm not that person. And that person has to, what do you call it? She needs to go into the dressing room and kind of get a book and just sit there, and a transformation has to happen. Mm-hmm. So I don't take phone calls hour before the show. All of that, whatever is happening in your personal life as a creator, it just, to me, was cluttering me being a channel. Mm-hmm. So when I align, I'm aligning from the back of my spine and the top of my head to the songs that want to come in and to the message. And whatever my personal stuff is, there's no room for that. It has to go. And so that's how you kind of get your hands on that 220 voltage, and you're able to ground and hold in order to document what's been going on, because it's not you anymore. You're really a container. And I think that that's an important thing to share, because people have said to me, but I have stage fright, I have this, or things that are happening in my own life are getting in the way. I said, because there's no place for that on that stage. You are holding hundreds of songs and emotions, and so if you choose to do that, certain performers, they have to get the ego out, and it's not all about them. You've got a lot of help and energy coming from the songs themselves or the narrative if you're an actor. It's a process, and it's really important. And then when I come off stage, it takes time to unwind, but I have to give that energy back.
Wow.
Or I think that's when you turn to it. Well, it can consume you because it's too much to hold as a human being.
Yeah.
When you're channeling this force, then you hand it back.
Yeah.
And other performers have talked to me about that. That's what they do. That's what they practice as well.
Wow. I mean, that makes sense to me, because, I can only imagine like how many times you've performed Cornflake Girl live. It must be, I don't know what, millions, like just a lot. But it makes sense to me that it's different every time. When you talk this way about what state you're in and how collaborative it is to perform any of those songs, it makes sense to me that it's a new thing every time.
Well, that's because if the narrative is changing every night and the songs are really they're there to help tell the story, then their role changes, and who they're playing in this narrative changes.
Yeah.
So we're casting the songs to really kind of share what's been going on. And some shows have a lot more fun in them. Certain cities, the audience wants to go there, and some nights, I played once. I played in Norway after the terrible murder of all those children.
Oh yeah.
And going in there, the grief was so deep. And Winter said to me, "You cannot play me. It would be cruel for you to play me now." And they're grieving, and they're in their grief. So here are the songs that want to step forward and be there, and be there for the people that are coming tonight who are still working through that grief. And sometimes it's really listening and not applying what I think wants to happen, but again, listening to what the audience that's coming, what they're experiencing, what they're feeling, what they're grieving about. Or another audience where they might be, look, we are ready to we've had enough. We need to have some fun.
Yeah.
We just need to get up and move. And then the audience guides me, and the show changes.
Wow. Now, usually it sounds like you are, writing songs. I think one or two of the albums that you wrote, you were doing it when you were touring, but usually it's either touring or being in the studio and writing and recording. Is that right?
Or I would take pilgrimage a lot. I'd travel a lot. Before the pandemic, I'd be traveling a lot, because that's where I mix up the routine in my personal life.
Yeah.
And I think you're able to, when I'm on my own, I can push things without, especially when Tash was younger, my daughter, now that she's older and she's in university, it is a bit different because I don't have to shelter her because she's in her own life. But there would be a time I'd take myself off, and my husband was great and he'd hold the fort down. He runs the studio here. And so I would go and write some of the things that I might need to get to that aren't easy to get to, that as a mom, I wouldn't want to expose a young child too. So pilgrimage is part of my process too, of course, because we haven't been able to travel. That's taken a different turn. I've had to travel, I don't know, to down the road, to the kitchen, to a tree, or to the books, imagination, going to places, reading about things, researching them, and then working with them.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask how being at home now. Where are you talking to us from? Where physically in space? Where are you?
I'm in Cornwall,
Okay,
in England, and I'm at the recording studio.
and
So it's great to be here at the recording studio. And where are you?
I am out north of Manchester in a place called Ramsbottom, actually, where I live. So yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of us during lockdown and during this new life have kind of, our circles have become smaller and smaller, and like you say, you visit the tree down the road, or I walk up the hill, and for me to go the 13 miles into Manchester is a pretty big deal, and doesn't happen very often these days. I imagine for you that's a really big change for someone who's used to traveling as much as you do. And do you think that your work will, the work that you make in these circumstances will be different?
Well, I'm gonna see. We're gonna see what happens. I think any touring musician would tell you right now that there's a level of grief not being able to tour and play music live. There's no question, because that's who we are. That's what we do.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that is like the live space for music, because it really is an exchange of energy between that audience and the performers. So to say that you can do it through Zoom, it's not the same thing. It's just not. So I think a lot of people who are live performers are missing that, but it will happen one day. We just don't know when. So we have to create in other ways. And I do find that that's the challenge and the calling right now, is to create. And what's coming, I'm not quite sure. Sometimes I'm a bit surprised what's coming.
Oh, great. Well, that sounds like a good place to be in. I mean, I think it would be weird if you weren't ever surprised, right, about what was coming. So that sounds healthy, I think.
Yeah, and like we talked about, depending on, because hopefully there'll be a record out next year.
Okay.
Depending on what happens in the next 4 or 5 weeks in the States, then there will be songwriters that are called to respond to that. And some will address it, like we said, in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Some will want to write in their own specific way. And some of us, it's hard to know what the future holds, but I know I'll be writing toward that.
But you of course have written this book, and I wanted to just ask you what it was like. Now, you've written a book before with a music journalist,
Yes.
But this was the first book that you wrote, completely by yourself. And I mean, I'm sure you had editors, that you worked with to kind of hone it. But I think as a kind of artistic undertaking, what was the experience like writing this book?
Oh my God, Kate, more than anybody. It's probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do, because music wasn't there as part of my storytelling. Yes, songs are used as a time machine to take us to these different time frames, but because I wasn't able to underscore it with music, then the words had to serve completely as the narrative.
Yeah.
So it was a huge learning curve, and there were really difficult days. And let's put it this way: when I was finished, I told my editor, Rakesh Sachal, I said, I'm ready to go back and write some music now. Because, oh my goodness. So yes, and it was hard. And yet when I turned in the chapters about my mother, Mary, she had passed in May 2019. And he called me up and he said, okay, here's the good news and the bad news. Good news is I think you found your voice with the Mary chapters for the book.
Mm-hmm.
And now all those other chapters that you've written, you need to go rewrite with this voice.
Oh, wow.
And so that was fun. But he was right.
Yeah.
He was right. Great.
I mean, it's an extraordinary form that you found, because I was sort of, when I saw that this book was coming out, I thought, wow, like that's, how is this going to work? Because you have a wonderful memoir aspect to this book. And then of course there's, the kind of the wonderful writing about the creative process and about your songwriting. And then there's all this insight about, geopolitics and, current affairs and, your responses to that. And I wouldn't have known like how, it's a pretty daunting prospect trying to figure out how to create a kind of apparatus that will hold all of that, sort of elegantly. And I think, and you've done it, which is, no small feat, but were there any books that were inspirations for you in that regard in terms of form and your approach?
Oh, so many. So many, too many to say. Jane Eyre, Dark Money, was a Bible for me because being a teenager in Washington playing Three Blocks from the White House, that I just happened to be there. This is when your story is what it is. And at the time, if you had asked me, I would have said, why can't I want to have her story or hers? But the fact that I'm living in my boring life, I just couldn't see at the time the value that I had a front row seat in the late 70s and early 80s when America was changing from Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan, and how people changed and what they wanted in a leader changed because of circumstances. At the same time, war rooms were being carved out on the K Street corridor, which is what they call it, K Street. And these would be places whereby think tanks were developing in order to steal the narrative, to take control of the narrative, whatever side you're on, to be in control of that narrative, and then to change the way people thought. We're back to technological warfare and propaganda. So I happened to be there while these seeds were being planted. And Rakesh, the editor, came to me in 2017 and just said, I know part of your story, because he worked on the book with Ann Powers, piece by piece. And he said, I know it. And I feel like it's time that you told this story. I feel like you owe it to people. He is the son of immigrants. He's a gay man. And he said, and I really feel like it's not time to be silent. You do have experience from a piano player, songwriter's perspective of many political moments in the last 50 years. And I feel like it's your responsibility to tell them. I said, I don't think anybody wants to hear it, really. And he said, no, I don't care. I want to hear it. And this is we're dear friends. And he said, this is your job. This is your calling. This is what you need to do. This is what you need to offer. And if people don't want to read it, they don't have to read it. Wow. So I said, okay. Okay.
Well, thank you to him for being so persistent, because we are all delighted to be able to read it. It is an incredible book.
Oh, thanks, Kate.
Yeah, no, I mean,
really
an absolute joy to read it. I mean, for people who know and love your music, but also just for anyone, you know what I mean? I think that it has a lot going on. and it feels like it was made for October 2020. It just feels like, I know it's been out for a few months now, but it just feels like it was, sent from God for this time, and so I think there's a certain amount of prescience going on there that I think is pretty amazing. So yeah, do you think you'll write another book again?
No.
No, that's it, done.
No, we're the cocktails.
Yeah.
Gin o'clock. Are you kidding? No. I'm a tequila gal. I'm not a gin gal. But anyway, no, that's for you, Kate.
Okay.
I'm back to music, songs. That's my world.
Yeah, no, it must be like getting back into a nice warm bath. I know what's going on here, yes.
Yeah. And I do want to say, if I may, to other artists out there and creators, is that what works for one writer is what is poison for another writer. So some writer said to me, I just when I go into certain subject matter, it takes me to such depression and sadness that I feel absolutely trapped.
Yeah.
And claustrophobic, and that I can't breathe. And I can't do it. The anxiety builds. And I said, well, then that subject, it's for, let it pass you by.
Absolutely.
Your treasure will come to you. So what works for one writer, which might be melancholy, and we talk about that in the book, where you're just able to use that and write. Some writers work with anger.
Yeah.
Anger can consume, so you really have to know who's in charge. Is the anger in charge, or are you in charge and applying it? But hopefully the book does talk about how each creator is unique, and sometimes, as we said, finding your true north is not always easy. And there's some days when you kind of write something and go, well, that's just not very good, is it? Yeah, it's just a bit stinky. So, and I've got loads of those that just don't work. They just don't work. Well, okay, move on.
Yeah.
Then you will write yourself out of it. But there are times when I do have a role of, okay, another one to the music graveyard. Bye, R.I.P. Have a nice one. But that's okay. Yeah, that's fine. That's why sometimes creators are not encouraged to, as I said, poop on your Manolos. Sometimes you just do.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. They're a nice pair of shoes, but you did.
Yeah.
It's not the end of your creative life. Change your shoes. Okay, they were expensive. It's an expensive lesson to learn. Wear different shoes when you're experimenting. Save the good ones till after you have a good, product.
And I think that, one of the things I've really drawn from meeting this and from talking to you is your willingness to expand what you are and what you do as an artist. I find that wonderful. I mean, when you're talking about Girl in the book and you're taking us through the story of that song, and you have this wonderful line, don't be afraid to grow and expand your sense of self as a person and as an artist, and that, I think we just can't hear that enough, because it is very easy once you've had a bit of success to just try and go back and, stay on safe ground. But really, if you want to get to where you need to go, sometimes as you say, you've got to push yourself a little into new territory, right?
Yeah, you do, Kate. And the other thing is that be kind to yourself, because there's a balance of pushing the work, drilling down on what you're trying to say, and the perfectionist side that a lot of us have, that we want it to be as good as it can. And yet sometimes we have to let it out into the world. Mm-hmm. Or we could hold on to it and hold on to it and hold on to it and almost unmake it. You've made it, and then you start to unmake it. And because we don't the skin is off. It's raw, putting the work out and hearing people fling it back to you and the criticism. But look, it's not easy being an artist. So wear that with pride. And sometimes, we all can feel like, well, this isn't really resonating with people. But the bottom line is, did it resonate with you? Were you true to your intention? And you let it go.
Yeah.
As I've said to you, when the girls leave the studio, we have a little toast of champagne and a little tear in our eye. And because we've only known them here, the musicians, Mark, Adam, only we know them.
Yeah.
And so now they're going out into the world. And some of them just, give big hugs and say, love you, see you. And some, they just have tequila in their bag and they're like, see you, dude.
Yeah.
And that's it. And then they're never yours again.
Yeah. So you have to
surrendering is important, Kate. Yeah. And you know that with your work. You know you have to do that. And it's not easy to do sometimes.
It isn't. But and what I also hear you saying beautifully is that we need to have compassion for ourselves, while also pushing ourselves. But, sometimes pushing is actually not what you need to do. And really just knowing what's right for the moment for you as an artist and for you as a human being. And I'd love to know, kind of with thinking about self-compassion and being kind to yourself, what for this year during this difficult time, what has brought you that kind of sense of peace? What music or art or books have you kind of have healed you, I guess, in some way this year? Can you think of any?
The kitchen.
The kitchen.
The kitchen. Yeah.
Cooking. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, that's really, Tash and I would be cooking dishes together. It would calm us, especially during lockdown.
Yep. Yeah.
Because, normally we would take off together. She'd say, see you, Pappy. And she and I would just go somewhere and have a rip-roaring time. She's 20 now, so, completely legal. Everything's legal in the UK with her. And so she and I, we just, go. And instead it'd be like, Mom, meet you in the kitchen.
Wow.
And because we're in Cornwall, we're in middle farm country, and that was where we could go. That's where we ran to. And I'm not a very good cook. She's much better than I am. But what it was incredibly. We shared that, and we were making something that then we shared with her dad, and her boyfriend was here, Oliver, at the time. And so we were able to then come together for a meal. But it was the making of the meal that was transformational for me. It was magic, sharing that with my daughter and laughing. And in a crazy time when we couldn't control anything, we were able to just make a plate of food.
Wow.
And in that moment, I thought, the value of just having this time with somebody I love so much and doing this, it was really it's what got me through.
Wow. Yeah. That is such a lovely image of you and your daughter cooking in the kitchen and making a wonderful meal. I mean,
I can't tell you it was wonderful. I don't know if the guys really liked it very much, but it's something we did, and we laughed.
Yeah.
And we laughed.
Well, we can't have enough laughing at the moment. I think we are pretty much out of time here. So I think I want to close on that hopeful, lovely, kind of golden note. Thank you so much for your generosity, Tori, in sharing your life with us and sharing your stories. I want to tell people that they can buy copies of Resistance, a songwriter's story of hope, change, and courage. This absolutely beautiful book from the Manchester Literature Festival's Waterstones page, which is on the festival website. And I also want to say this is just the first night of Manchester Literature Festival. Please do check out the rest of the program, which has an amazing array of wonderful people, including Kay Tempest and Ellie Smith and Angela Davis and Jackie Kay in conversation. Wow. Please do go get involved in some of those other events. But in the meantime, thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. And especially thanks to you, Tori, for all of the warmth and generosity you brought to this.
Thank you, Kate. You've been wonderful. Your questions have been brilliant. So I've loved having this conversation, and best with your creativity. And thank you, Manchester.
Thank you.